So hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for our third session in the Scholarly Summer Writing Institute series, and this will be on best practices for managing a team of researchers. So really excited to learn more about this today. Just to let you know, I'm Stacy Penna, I'm the QSR Community Director, and I'll be just the moderator sort of behind the scenes helping out.
Thank you, Stacy. Hi, everyone. I am Jessica Parker. I'm the owner of Dissertation by Design. I'm also a capstone advisor at Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences and their Doctor of Health Sciences program. My background is in healthcare research, and before founding Dissertation by Design, I was the senior research director in Boston, and I managed several large-scale research grants, authored a number of publications, and wrote grants with a large research team. So I have lots of thoughts on how to best manage a team of researchers, and I'm really excited to be joined today by two colleagues and members of my team, Dr. Veronica Richard and Lydia Manning. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to them. Veronica, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. I have been on various research teams from just a couple of people to 11 people, and so I'm excited to share those experiences with you and help you navigate the process. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Manning. I'm delighted to be here today with you. I have worked independently and also on research teams for the last 15 or so years. I feel like I've learned a lot in the process, and I am looking forward to sharing those insights with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we'll also have our software expert. So for Citavi, Jennifer will be going through that. So Jenny, if you want to just say hi to everyone.
Hey everyone, yeah, looking forward to showing you the collaboration options in Citavi.
Great, thank you. And Laura, one of our certified Platinum NVivo trainers, will be showing how you can use NVivo to help with your teamwork.
Hello everyone, Laura coming to you today from the foothills of Rocky Mountains in southern Alberta in Canada, and working with NVivo and teams is one of my favorite things, so I'm really looking forward to today's session.
Great, thank you both. And here's just our agenda today. So the first 40 minutes will be Dissertation by Design, the coaches talking about the establishing authorship roles and responsibilities, agreeing on a detailed timeline, determining communication standards, and setting clear expectations. And then Jenny will show the Citavi software and how it can help when you're working as a team. And then Laura will show NVivo and how you can collaborate. And we'll be showing NVivo Collaboration Cloud to an additional module to NVivo. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jessica.
So today, Lydia and Veronica and I will be talking as a panel, and we're going to present 10 best practices for managing a team of researchers. We've already introduced ourselves, so I'll skip over this slide. But before we dive in, we're curious about our audience. So could you do us a favor and just let us know, what is your current role? Are you a graduate student researcher? Are you a novice academic researcher, seasoned or non-academic researcher? Oh, great. So 51% graduate student researcher, 23% novice academic researcher, 16% seasoned, and 9% non-academic. So great. I'm hoping that the graduate students who are here today and the novice academic researchers will learn a lot of helpful information. Maybe it'll all be new to you. And then our more seasoned researchers, hopefully there will be something here that maybe would be helpful for you also, so you could implement in your collaboration with other researchers. We have one more poll. How many researchers do you typically collaborate with, for those of you who do work on research teams? None. That might be some of our graduate students, or maybe you prefer to work alone, or groups of 2 to 3 or 4 plus. Perfect. So it looks like 33% of you have not had the opportunity yet to collaborate with other researchers. A few of you, 7%, work alone. A good portion of you, 47%, work in teams of 2 to 4, and then 13% in 5 or more. Interesting. Good. So the first best practice that we'd like to discuss with you is the importance of establishing authorship roles and responsibilities. This is actually a screenshot of an authorship grid. For this one is a quantitative manuscript. This is something that Veronica actually suggested. I'm used to creating authorship tables, but Veronica mentioned that she had used a grid like this quite often when she first started working with her mentor. Veronica, do you want to jump in and talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, it was very helpful, especially on the teams that had more than 3 people. And we would sit down and really try to establish, what is it that we're doing, who wants to do what, who feels comfortable doing what. And in this particular article that the link is down below, they also have a qualitative manuscript and also a literature review manuscript, which I found very helpful. One of the things that we did in our research with my mentor is, depending on who came up with the idea, someone else would be doing the literature review totally. So that would be like their role would be the literature review. So it's a little different. It's not like everybody would be working on the literature review in my experiences, but this seemed very helpful to me and a good example of what is helpful, I think, when we're embarking on these team endeavors.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to think about, at least when I wrote my first manuscript, when I was getting my master's degree, at the time, because I was new, I thought of authorship as just getting public credit for your work. I had not yet worked in a research team, so I didn't really, it wasn't until I started working with a team of researchers that I fully understood the importance of understanding the role of everyone in the team and the responsibilities, not just the responsibility in the sense of this is what you need to be doing on the research study and the manuscript, but also taking responsibility for what you've been assigned to do. And that's incredibly important to think about, not just in the sense of this is what you were supposed to be doing, but making sure that everything is being done correctly, like fully owning that part of the work and making sure that the data is being collected according to how it was, detailed in the IRB application, and kind of standing up for, if you're the statistician, really speaking for the statistical analyses and the interpretations, and just truly taking ownership for that, not just getting, credit publicly by being listed as an author on a manuscript. So that responsibility piece, I think it's incredibly important for everyone on the team to have a good sense of their role and everything that they're responsible for, and communicating, updates to the team based on, those responsibilities.
Yeah, I would also say it helped us, for me at least, recognize when something was beyond me. And I could say, guys, I know that I'm doing this part, but it's not, I need some help. And so this type of a grid or process of really making this clear to everyone also helped me identify the areas where I just needed some support. And then people were able to teach me a little bit so that I could continue my responsibility. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add here, it's just really great out of the gate for there to be no surprises later down the road, right? Keeps everybody in good working order. And then one additional note, I do think it's important just to be mindful of where you are in terms of disciplinary expectations. So these are the larger conventions. I know that, for example, anthropologists order alphabetically. Medical schools, the person of the lab, they go last. I think it's just important to keep in mind in the disciplinary context in which you're working to establish authorship to moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lydia. And when you're submitting a manuscript, many journals now will require you to outline the roles and responsibilities of each author. And so it's important to be familiar with, how that journal kind of defines what those roles and responsibilities are, how it's weighted. And so just being familiar with the journal as well as your discipline.
Yeah, and I think I'll just do one more point here. For those people who are wanting just to do research on their own, this is also a good process for you to make a grid, put down what your research idea is, and then everything that you want to get accomplished in that particular article, and when you want to get that done. Kind of get that timeline in focus and see what's doable for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Let's move on to the second best practice, which is establish and agree on a clear vision for the research. For example, when we think about a clear vision for the research, when I kind of recommended this as a best practice, I was immediately thinking back to my first experience managing a research team. And in that particular scenario, we had received a grant and I was hired to direct the team. And so because a grant was already in place, there was a clear vision. We had already, we had outcomes that we needed to report on to the funder. We had outlined in our grant application, what would take place over a period of 4 years. So in that sense, everyone was already on board. But the next grant that I wrote, because we were building the team and writing the grant, it was a bit of a different experience. We had to meet as a team and all kind of confer. What is a vision for the research? Who owns what? What do we hope will happen after this? Are we going to try for more grant funding? And what are the goals of the organization? And so it's not all about just what you want to happen within that very specific research study. It's really thinking long-term about what are the long-term goals and planning accordingly. Lydia or Veronica, do y'all want to weigh in on this one?
I just what now what, right? What is your purpose and what do you want to achieve? And then I think it helps people align, their own ideas about their research agenda, how it's meshing with the project, and then where you hope the work ultimately goes to live when the research project is completed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say the type of research matters as far as what the vision is. And so, for example, I've worked on several evaluation studies with teams in which once we established what type of an evaluation we were doing, that kind of sets the boundaries and the vision, right? And purpose for where we're headed, and also helps us understand the data that we need and all that good stuff. But also I've worked on teams with methodological transcripts, and in that case it's I'm primarily qualitative research, so it can be very the vision can start with a general idea and then it kind of morphs as we learn more and more about our craft as researchers. So the type of study and the type of manuscript you're doing, I think, matters when we're looking at this vision.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point, Veronica. And I'd say if you're in a scenario where you are a graduate student, I have a client that I'm working with right now. He's a graduate student. This is his first research project, and he has some individuals who are interested in being co-authors on the next project. So I was trying to help him think about what do those next steps look like, and making sure that you have the right people on your side to help you achieve that vision. So sometimes you start with one team, and then as the research evolves, other members come in and out based on how the research evolves. And sometimes it's not possible to know the full vision up front, especially until you have some preliminary data. But at least being in agreement in the beginning, I think that's a really important first step. How are we looking on time? And go to the third best practice.
Yeah.
Ooh, set clear expectations.
I have
Sorry.
one. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jessica. Do you want to go or?
No, you're good.
Okay. One thing specifically comes to mind, and that is our processes for collecting and managing the data and then analyzing the data. And we really need to be thinking about these things ahead of time, especially if you have, you know, a bigger team. And I can just remember one of the teams that I worked on, we were collecting data and all of us were running different focus groups. Well, if we're not doing the things in the same way, that is, you know, threatening, if you will, the credibility of our research and what each of us are getting. So we want to make sure that we have systems in place of how things are being said, when they're being said, so on and so forth. In qualitative research, yes, things will emerge, but we still want to have a plan of how we're going to do these things. I can unfortunately remember that a couple of the focus groups forgot to do consent forms. That's huge. That cannot happen. So that's where these expectations, I think, come into play, is what is the process, how are we going to do this, and making sure that everybody's on board.
I would add it's important to not only set the clear expectations, but also to piggyback, Veronica, on what you were saying, create a process, right? Is it a Gantt chart? Is it something where people can see, okay, here are the action items, here are the goals that align with the vision of the research, that mesh well with our timeline, and then here are the exact steps, the checklists to ensure that everybody's, you know, engaging in best practices and getting things done effectively and efficiently.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're, especially in a scenario, if you're working with a team and there's a funder involved, making sure that everyone on the team is aware of what are the funder's expectations, what did you commit to when you submitted the grant application, and making sure they're clear on those and understanding the differences. You know, sometimes with what you've committed to with a funder, those things are more set in stone, whereas there might be some expectations that are a bit more flexible. So I think being able to delineate between the two and making sure those boundaries are clear are important also, because they're in the team that I managed, it was a rather large team and it was across 2 different universities. So having different organizations and kind of different cultures, that was incredibly challenging. And so what I learned through that experience was sometimes if people thought it was just coming from me, the director, maybe they could kind of push the deadline. But if I communicated that, no, this is a deadline for the funder and we cannot miss this deadline, then sometimes they took it a little more seriously. So I think from the get-go, when you talk about those authorship roles and responsibilities, and you're talking about, you know, a vision for the research, that really ties into what is absolutely necessary, what has to happen because you've made a commitment to a funder, versus what are some things that, you know, could potentially emerge through the research that are not set in stone. Veronica, Lydia, do y'all have anything to add, or do you want to go to the next?
I would just say, I think some of this too is learning, and this ties into communication strategy, but sometimes this is about having difficult conversations and making expectations as well. And we'll get into that as we go.
Yeah, I think that definitely ties into one of the other best practices we have about those communication standards. And yeah, sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, but sometimes those are more avoidable if you follow this best practice and everything is crystal clear in the beginning, so there's no surprises. Okay. So number 4 is agree on a detailed timeline. So not just a timeline, but a detailed timeline. And Lydia mentioned it in the last, when she was just speaking, but using a Gantt chart can be incredibly helpful, or some other project management type software to help you kind of outline not only milestones, but incremental goals based on the responsibilities of the individual team members, and having an incredibly detailed timeline that is updated. So someone's in charge of updating the timeline and keeping the team appraised of the progress and the work that remains ahead. Veronica or Lydia, did y'all want to add anything?
I would add that you accounting for due dates, when you are expected to have tangible items produced on the research project, but I would also build in human reality, that sometimes we do miss our deadlines and our timeline needs to shift. So just being, I don't know, I think there's a sweet spot when you're working in teams, being flexible, yet staying on task and being diligent. And I think that groove in the team is important.
Yeah, and keeping in mind, you know, the academic calendar too. I mean, that seems obvious, but I remember the first Gantt chart that I created, without even really thinking about it, we had like a major milestone over Christmas break. And in academia, we typically take, you know, 2 to 3 weeks off around Christmas time. The universities are closed around New Year's. And so just really thinking about all members of the team, and then also the academic calendar, you know, who's around in the summer, who has a teaching load in the summer, what are the responsibilities of the team outside of the research based on the academic calendar.
Yeah, and I would add that sometimes we don't know the details. And I guess what I mean by that is that sometimes we get into something, for example, if we're looking at analysis, we might get into the analysis process and realize that we need to do another round of organizing, or something else needs to be done prior to that first cycle coding, if you will, and we didn't know that before, so we have to go back and update that and put that detail in. Also with people who are using different types of data, sometimes you know, we traditionally think of transcripts, but today, I mean, we have so much more at our fingertips with social media, different forms of data, visual images, blogs, all different kinds of things. And so when we're looking at this detail, sometimes we need to add in the details as we go, especially on the qualitative side, just because things are changing so fast in our world with technology, that, you know, that's that unknown piece that I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's a good point, Veronica. Okay, let's move on to number 5. So establishing communication standards. Obviously, depending on how large your team is, this could look a little different, but some things that I like to talk about when I have like that first team meeting with my research team is really just ensuring that everyone feels that their feedback and their input is valuable, and starting to create a culture of open and honest and transparent communication within the team. And I think a good way to start to establish that type of culture is in your first research team meeting is to start to establish some communication standards. And this could look, you know, this could look very different depending on who you are and where you're working, what type of environment. If you're in a nonprofit environment or in a private corporate company, which I know maybe Lydia could weigh in on that, because Lydia has transitioned from academia and now she's in the private sector, and I know that it differs based on your setting, what is considered reasonable and what's not in terms of communication standards. But I know with our research team, we had some pretty strict communication standards around, like, we're not going to be texting about research, or, you know, nothing is urgent enough to call you, you know, late in the evening. So we really tried to keep things within business hours, try to send emails where everyone's copied on it and everyone is in the loop. but that might not be the case within your organization. It might be a bit different. Lydia, do you want to touch on that a bit? Has there been a big shift in these kind of communication standards?
There is quite the, I would say, an expectation around response time. I feel like, and again, that's what you can work out ahead with your team. You know, do you get a 24-hour grace period if I ask a question? And I think too, this leads to, we'll get to a best practice of creating a shared workspace, but because we have so many tools at our disposal for project management and for working in teams, you can create a real-time work environment with people all over the world. And again, this needs to be a clear set of working expectations about how you respond, when you respond, ways in which you respond, and where all that information is kept. I know that in my new role, transparency for the entire global team is really important. So it's incumbent upon us to communicate in a way where everybody can see it and then everybody can have access to it at any given time.
Yeah, and having a person in charge of the team communication. So who is going to be responsible for sharing communications with the team? For myself, because I was originally hired to direct a grant, I was the program director, so I was the one who was sending out all communications with the team, but that might not be the case in your situation. So determining who is that point person going to be, if there's an issue, so everyone's very clear on who they need to go to communicate something about the project, if it's, you know, something that's important to share outside of their role, and who's going to be in charge of disseminating that information and kind of managing the communications between the teams, so everyone is always appraised of the status of the research project.
I have 2 points: stakeholder communication and young scholars and communication. So with stakeholder communication, I think, you know, we're primarily thinking about the team here in our communication standards, but I think we also need to look at those stakeholders. Do we have funders? Do we have people that we need to keep in the loop? And what is that standard? And who is that point person, as Jessica mentioned? And understanding if there's a, and Lydia, maybe you could speak to this too, if there is a, if we're talking globally, there are not only time differences, but cultural differences and things like that that need to be considered and brought into play. So I don't know, Lydia, if you wanted to add anything about that as far as the...
Yeah, developing thick skin when you're working cross-culturally has probably been one of my takeaways. Realizing there's just a different way to relay information, and to have a sensitivity to that, I think, is important. I would also add too, when we're working in teams and we're working with data, you know, it's just important to keep ethics in mind too, right? Where are those what are we communicating about? Where does that live? Is it protected communication? Should it be? If not, why not? Just keeping ethics, I think, in your brain as you're navigating.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then as far as the young scholars go, I feel very lucky in my experience because I had a mentor who said, "Hey, I have this idea. Do you want in?" And I was like, "Yes, I do want in." But if you don't have someone doing that, it's okay for you to approach them and say, "Hey, I'm interested in doing this. I'm interested in learning as much as I can. You know, let me know if there's anything that I can do to work on a team or to get more research experience." I think, unfortunately, in today's universities, we're not getting the research experiences that I think I got. So asking for that is really important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, let's move on. Ooh, practice mindfulness. So I added this in, and then, you know, Veronica and Lydia agreed. And by mindfulness, no, I don't mean meditation, although if you meditate, that's great. More so just practicing constant reflection and So some things that came to mind for me was keeping a researcher's journal and reflecting on the process, especially if it's your first time working within a research team, reflecting on the lessons learned, and that'll help you start to develop your self-awareness as a member of a research team. So I think that, and as researchers, reflection is important, and so I think that self-reflection is an important component of mindfulness, and that helps you develop your self-awareness. And so hopefully you become a better team member over time by being thoughtful and, reflecting on your experience.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Jessica. And for those of you who are looking at leading teams, one of the teams that I was on during my doctoral process, she actually had us each, she bought us a journal and said, you will reflect as we're going through this process. And then we had debriefing processes, not only as a team, but between me and the leader. And that was so helpful as a young scholar to have that support and to recognize when, yeah, I didn't really handle that well, what could I maybe do next time, and things like that. I think were just super helpful in my development.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to practicing mindfulness as a way to kind of, for those of you who are over analytical in all areas of your life, mindfulness is a nice way to just manage some of the anxiety, particularly for the novice researchers and the graduate students. I think sometimes it can create a sense of heightened experience. And I think mindfulness is a good way to focus yourself. Remember that you can do this work, you are doing this work, you're capable of this work, and to kind of minimize some of the imposter syndrome and just really be present in the process and feeling like you're a participatory member.
Oh yeah, the imposter syndrome, at least for me, was very real. The first research study that I was a team member on was when I was getting my master's degree, and the PI was world renowned in the field. People from all over the world would come to our school to meet with this PI. And when I first started working with him and with the group, there was probably about 15 of us. It was clinical research. So we were always in a lab and in a healthcare clinic. We would have meetings with him, I believe it was maybe once a month. And I would have like almost a panic attack because I was managing the data collection in the clinic. So I would have to always report out. And I wish that I had my mindfulness practice back then to help me manage that anxiety. Because I felt like an imposter. I questioned myself. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm getting my master's degree and here's this world-renowned researcher who's like a titan in our field, and what am I doing at this table? I don't belong here. I wish I had been more mindful and really reflective of that experience then, and I think having a mindfulness practice would have been incredibly helpful at that point in my life. Let's move on. Oh, this is one that I struggle with. Delegate, which could mean a lot of different things depending on what you think about it. Obviously, if everyone's determined their roles and responsibilities, you might be thinking, well, you shouldn't have to delegate. Everyone already knows what they're going to do. But when I was thinking about this, what came to mind was actually all the people who are still involved in the research but are not on the research team. So there was a project that I was managing where we had to get the buy-in from clinical support staff, students, and faculty. And I had to learn how to delegate to people outside of the research team in order to help us achieve our goals. Because we were in a healthcare setting that involved recruiting patients and providing patient care in a new type of collaborative environment. And so I had to get comfortable with asking front desk staff who had been working at the institution for years, who were older than me, who were seasoned and really comfortable in their jobs, to do something completely different. And at first it kind of terrified me, and I tried to just do as much as I could of it on my own, which just was not feasible, especially because that was a 4-year grant. So learning to delegate both within the team and then thinking about who you need to help you outside of the team to conduct the research, who might not necessarily, be on the research team. Veronica, did you have anything to add?
I just that outside of the team is super important with the management of the data, and I think we're going to see some tools here in a little bit that helps us with that. But also having someone directly like that is their job, and a lot of times that person's not on the team. It's a staff member or something that is just helping us move forward. So that piece is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I want to be thoughtful of time. We have several more of these to get through, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to number 8. Establish an IRB point person. This is incredibly important, not just to have someone in charge of it, but also who can manage all aspects of the IRB process. Does everyone have their city training certificate or their human subjects training? Making sure that you have one person who's in charge of not just all the materials, but responding to inquiries from the IRB, and checking in with the team to make sure everything is going according to plan, to see, do we need to submit an IRB modification because something else is actually happening in the field than what we thought would happen. So I don't mean just one person who's submitting the application and letting the team know that it was approved, but if you have a team, especially in an environment where they're collecting data from human subjects and there is any risk involved, in particular, making sure that everything is going, in fact, according to plan. I know, Veronica, I think you may have mentioned it already, you had a story about an issue with consent.
Yeah, what happened is we were doing research in another country when we had started 5 months ahead of time to secure IRB approval, and they kept pushing back on the cultural contact, the in-country contact person on the consent form, and they made us take it off. Well, when we got in country, the people who we were conducting research with they wanted it in there. So we had to then go back and forth between the country and the US IRB, university IRB person that we were working with. And if we would have had more than one person working on that, it would have been a disaster. So having those point people are super, important, and to just understand that there are differences when we go outside of our own countries, and hoping to honor all the participants in the countries that we're in, and that takes sometimes pushing back to the IRB, at least in the United States.
Yeah, and ideally that point person is someone who has experience. So if you're, new to a research team and you don't have much experience with IRB outside of maybe just your PhD research, I would recommend, if there is an option for someone on the team who has more experience maybe that you could learn from, instead of diving into that role and volunteering for that position. And having a point person doesn't mean that that person can't delegate, but it's just nice to know that that is the one person who's in charge of making sure everything is handled, everything is up to snuff, and if there's any issues, that's the one person that would kind of step forward and have those communications with the IRB office.
Yeah, and data management too, as far as like the consent forms and all the forms that are needed to go along with that, would be optimal to have one person have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lydia, did you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, depending on the size of your organization or your institution, it also doesn't hurt to have a nice relationship with the IRB. If you can do that, and the point person you're working with on the IRB side, sometimes that can be tremendously helpful in terms of timely turnaround.
yeah, develop those relationships. That was something that I learned. I was just having a memory, something I learned from my mentor. We used to send birthday cards and Christmas cards to our IRB person, to the director of the IRB office because we had several grants going at once, so we relied on her quite a bit, and we would sometimes take her to lunch, not to try to, get by with anything, but just so that we knew she would pick up the phone if we called and needed something. We wanted her to know who we were, just to really enhance that relationship and that communication. Okay. This is one of my favorites. Yeah, acknowledge and celebrate milestones and accomplishments. This is incredibly important. We don't do this enough in academia. We tend to only celebrate if we get the grant or if the article is published. I highly recommend, especially working in a team and having that positive and uplifting team culture, because research does typically span quite a bit of time, a year or more. Celebrate every minor milestone and openly recognize members of the team based on milestones they've accomplished. So celebrate submitting the IRB application. Celebrate reaching your sample size. Don't wait until something major happens, because we need to celebrate those moments more, because there are many more accomplishments other than, like I said, just getting the grant or getting the article published. I was just actually remembering, I was about to ask Veronica if she wanted to chime in, but it made me remember of when we launched a grant, we actually, because we did need the buy-in from the staff, we had a ribbon cutting ceremony with like cake and hors d'oeuvres and drinks, which seemed overboard at the time. It was hard for me to get on board with that and have like a budget item for that celebration. But realizing that that was incredibly important to get buy-in from the members of the clinic who we needed to support the research study. So just even some sort of celebration in that sense. It doesn't have to be with the research team. It could be with other individuals outside of the team that you need their support and buy-in in order for the research to be successful. So find creative ways to get other people involved and to celebrate. Lydia or Veronica, did y'all want to jump in?
I would just add that gratitude and appreciation go a long way in any kind of team-like environment, and a research team is no different.
Yeah, sure. Oh, we're almost out of time. I'm going to jump to, this one. So create a shared workspace. I just have one little thing to say about this, and then I'll let Veronica and Lydia chime in. This was actually an interesting learning experience for me. When I was managing the grant in Boston, I originally set everything up in Dropbox, and then I quickly learned from my institution that they did not approve Dropbox, and we had to transition everything over to Box. So if you're thinking about a shared workspace, before you make that decision and you start implementing that workspace, make sure that there aren't going to be any issues with your institution. Because with data management and data storage, you have to make sure that the workspace is going to be safe and encrypted. And in some cases, institutions will want to approve that workspace if you're sharing data.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good as far as that goes. I've done several team projects where we're just analyzing data. So having the processes in a digital platform is so helpful now. Back in the day, we didn't have that. and so having that now is a blessing. And I think we're going to hear more about that here in a little bit. But yes, it can be done by hand, and having those processes again set out in front of us, and then a way to share that in a safe and protected way is critical.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. And to optimize technology and have it be your friend, I think is also a useful practice. And there are ways to be able to work, simultaneously communicate with people in real time, all in a data management platform, a data management and analysis platform.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump from that then into how you can work with Citavi in a team. For those who don't yet know much about Citavi, it's a program for reference management and knowledge organization. And you can kind of think of it as a tool that helps with all of your supporting literature for a project. And it also helps you organize the writing process and organize your writing in Word when you're working together. So in the other two sessions, we were looking primarily at Citavi for Windows. So today I thought it would be nice to show you our new version, Citavi Web. Basically, you have any kind of option you need for working in the team. So if your data isn't too sensitive, you can use cloud projects or use a Citavi web project. And then if you have something that's a little bit more sensitive where you shouldn't be storing any files online or any information online, we do also have a server version that lets you store everything on your own server and there's no connection to the internet. So if you really need that, sometimes certain studies do need that, it's there. So the features I'll show you today, they're the same in all three programs, just the layout looks a little bit different in Citavi for Windows and Citavi for DB Server. So let's take a look at what you can do in Citavi. I'll just go to, this is just kind of the main view here, and I'm going to go into the project. This is just our demo project, so you can try it out for yourself as well. And first, of course, I would want to add my team members. I've already added one here, Stacy. And if I want to add my other colleague, I can do that. Oops. Do that here. And you have a few different, I think my keyboard's a little, okay, there we go. You have a few different roles that you can choose. So the project leader can delete the project, and they also have author rights. And then there's the author rights role where you can make changes to the project, and you can also give people read-only access. And I'll have to double check why I misspelled Yana's email address, so maybe we'll just jump over that for now. But Stacy's already in the project, so we'll work with her and just see what we can do then when we're in the project together. You'll notice here, I'll just give you a little overview. We have our references here, so all of our sources that we would be working with. And then we can view any PDFs we have in this text workspace, and we can highlight together and take information and save it. Looks like it's being a little slow to load there. Just save it over here on the quotations tab. And all of that information you pull out here and any evaluations you're doing of the documents, you can then bring over into Word later on. And we have the knowledge organizer, so that's where you can look at all of that information you pull out of each individual reference and compare and contrast and categorize it and really kind of build it out. My internet's a bit slow today, so things aren't, there we go, things aren't loading right away. Should hopefully be a bit faster if you're trying it out on your computer. Yeah, and you have also the task planner. And so this is where you can assign tasks to your colleagues, or you have an overview of tasks that you've assigned or that have been assigned to you. So this is one that I assigned to Stacy, and I can see that she hasn't started that task yet. So I'm a little bit disappointed.
I'll get right on that, Jenny.
Then I can see which tasks were assigned to me, and I see, oh, okay, this is one also that I haven't started. Oh, whoops, and that I think we meant to assign that to me. So that would be one that then I would start working on. And I would go into, so I want to read this text, so I'll go look for that reference, and then I would, let's see, I think it's that one there. Then I would open up the text panel here and go through, and I actually did this already before, or whoever was in our example project, Jane Doe. One thing I want to point out, you can see who's modified an item or a reference. So if you're in the references section, you can always use this little I symbol down here, and then you see the information. And that can be kind of helpful if you're looking at something and thinking, why did they write that? Or who wrote that? Then you have the information and could ask them. And one of the ways you can ask them is through the chat up here. So I could write to Stacy. And we'll see if she's actually online. Yeah, I think my connection's a bit slow, everyone, so sorry about that.
I did reply, so it'll probably show up in a second.
Oh. But you could use this also to, so I guess before they were speaking about gratitude and showing gratitude. So that's one way you can use the chat. But you could also use it if you had a question about something, or you want to, I could tell her here, hey, I just finished going through these articles you wanted me to look at, and I've highlighted them. I had a few questions for you. And so that's something you can do also when you're going through the articles. You could use, for example, the comment feature to add a question or something like that. Or you can add it as a task. So let's go up here to tasks, and I might want to say, and then you go to this plus symbol, and you can use one of these predetermined tasks, or I could say something like, question about results, and assign that to Stacy. And I want to talk to her by next week, and then I could put some additional information in here. So let's discuss these, or maybe the discussion session. Okay. And then that'll show up in the tasks section as well. And right now I'm in the assigned to me section, so I'll just go back to all. And so then that shows up here. And then when Stacy filters her tasks, she would see the ones assigned to her. So that's just kind of a nice way that you can kind of keep on track and on top of those different tasks and jobs you have to do related to the supporting literature if you're collaborating with another author. And when you're ready to write, all you would need to do then is, everyone would of course have to be working with the same Citavi project, and you can then just create a Word document and save it somewhere like, we tend to use OneDrive for that, so that works really well. But you just would have to have a way that everyone can view the Word document. So some other online storage tool would work as well, like Dropbox or something like that. And then you can just work on the writing together. You could also have different chapters as different documents, of course, but let's say that we're working on this, this report together, then we could each insert references into the document. We can insert that information we've gathered from the readings. So if I want to put in this definition of food fraud, I can do that. And then it'll make sure that your citations are properly formatted, and will generate the list of references at the end. And you can, of course, change those citation styles as well. So that's kind of a very quick overview. And I think then I'll actually pass everything along to Laura. But if there are any questions, we should have some time for those at the end. Then if you need any more information about Citavi's collaboration features.
So for those of you who have been on some of the previous calls, you'll know I like to start with the welcome window and orient you to where you can find some of the information that I'm going to show you today. So I wanted to show you, first of all, that I'll be using the sample project that's built into both Windows and Mac. And then before we leave this window today, I wanted to show you a couple of things in this navigation bar at this window. So we've heard lots of great tips for working in a team, both before you're getting established and doing data collection, when you're doing your literature, and eventually bringing that back into the writing. And that teamwork needs to continue in a smooth way, or I would suggest is better to continue in a smooth way when you're working on your analysis. And for those of us who've worked individually in NVivo and learned the ropes and know the project and so on, I have noticed that it can sometimes be a big surprise when you start to work with other people doing analysis and you start to put your work together. And I think Veronica alluded to before how important it is that everybody has the same understanding of how you're going to approach things. So just like you have a plan for writing and a table and how that will go, whose role is what, and so on, I would strongly suggest having an analysis plan where you're also understanding who's looking at which documents. Do some documents need to be double coded? Who's going to do what, and so on. So before I leave this window today, I wanted to show you a couple of things that we'll touch on. One is in this application option for the NVivo projects in general. I'd like you to notice that on this general tab, there is a way to make sure that everyone who's working on a project actually enters their initials. And this is really, really important, because if you're working on analysis on separate projects and eventually merge those two projects together, which I'm going to show you a little bit about how to do that, then the way that NVivo tells my work from Jenny's work or Stacy's work or Veronica's work is by the initials. And if you want to have some checks and balances about who's coding what where and so on, then NVivo has to know who did that work. And the way NVivo knows that is by having your initials entered in the project. So I highly encourage you to make sure that those initials are required for anybody working in a project. So I'll cancel out of here. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is this button for Collaboration Cloud. And we'll speak about Collaboration Cloud right at the end. And when I'm handing things back over to Stacy, she's going to just show us what Collaboration Cloud looks like. But I'll talk a little bit about it before then. So let me go into the project, Environmental Change Down East. And I've modified this project a little bit, but it is a project where multiple team members were working. And I want to show you some things that sometimes we don't pay attention to until we actually know what they're telling us. So in this left-hand bar is a list of all the folders and items in my NVivo project. And when I have a folder open, you can see the list of things in the list view window that's open here. So right now I have the codes folder open, and I'd like to point out that you can actually see information about your codes over here. So you can see that this code was created by this researcher, and you can see when it was last modified and who modified it and so on. So it can be really helpful to pay attention to some of these things. Now, when you're working in a team with NVivo, one of the things that people often ask, and what we as trainers run into as problematic all the time, is whether or not we can work with Mac and with Windows in the same team environment? And the answer is it is not recommended. And I'll say it again, it's not recommended. You can convert a Mac project to a Windows project or vice versa, but I have, as a trainer, often get panic calls from team members late in the game saying, we can't seem to combine our projects, or things are not working the way they're supposed to, and so on. So it is highly recommended that everybody in the team work on either Windows or Mac and in the same version of NVivo. So that's tip number one. Stick with one operating system and the same version. And then, as we heard earlier, we can see Citavi's way of tracking tasks and so on, but we also heard that people on the team need to understand their role within the team. And in the NVivo project, I would highly suggest also that you appoint a person who's a team lead. Now, that might be the team lead in the other context, but what the team lead needs to do is kind of make sure that things are kept and maintained in a very organized way in NVivo. So they might be checking that the files are named consistently. You have a consistent naming system for your files, usually with a little bit of a code built in to help you understand what that file represents. And it doesn't help most people to see a date, let's say, for the name of the file. If you weren't the interviewer, that date has no meaning to you. But it probably helps you to see focus group 1 and this community or whatever you're using for ID. So consistent naming, the team lead helps maintain that kind of consistency. And then I'd also suggest that you keep notes about all of those things in your memos folder. So you could set up a folder for team memos, and you could have memos for each of the individual coders. You'll see I've got folders here for BJ, Jamal, and myself, who might all be working in this project. We're keeping our memos here. But in the team memos folder, I might also have memo with the document naming system, what we've agreed to for creating new codes, who's taking a lead on certain items, and so on. So you could even include your research team minutes in there. The advantage to that is it's all in the same project. Everyone can access it. It helps with some of that transparency and consistency that we heard is so important to working in a team environment. Let me also say that for me, a team may represent you as a student and your supervisor, even if that supervisor may not be doing any analysis, but you want to track things and be able to show that to a person, then you can help think about things and do things consistently by having that documented in your memos folder, and also being able to share certain items. So for instance, yesterday I showed you how to share your code book, for instance, that would help the other people understand what definitions you're using for your codes, how your coding structure is looking, and so on. So let me come back to this codes folder, and I want to show you one other little tip that I use here, and it could be you know, that you're doing something similar to this, but when we're coding actively as a team in NVivo, it could be that we have the same transcripts and we're each coding certain ones, especially if double coding is part of your analysis process. And then you want to understand what things belong in which codes. The code book and the definitions could be printed, and you can have that beside you. That can help a lot with that. And if you didn't see that yesterday, to create a code book, you come up and you go to share, export, and export a code book, and it will export a list of all of the codes. So, but the other thing that can be really helpful is having a convention for how we create new codes. So some of these codes might have already been established. We understand what belongs in them. We know what to code and so on. If we have questions about them, we might say that in the memo linked to the code, track what we think needs to happen and change, potentially merging codes and so on. But the other thing I would suggest is that you could create a top level code simply called new code. And if I open this, you'll see that I have created subcodes for each of the coding members of our team. And this process works really well when you're kind of at interim stages of analysis and you've got some codes developed and some new ones that might arise. If we have a team convention of everyone who creates a new code puts it beneath their own top level or beneath their own code, later on when we merge our projects and have our next team meeting and talk about the progression of the analysis, then we can say, oh, I created a new code. I can easily see what that is. And Jamal created a new code and he can talk about what he's got coded there. We can look inside to see if the information is similar, whether or not we need one combined code, and so on. So because we're working individually, we often have a brainwave that we want to track and code and so on. This really helps us when we go to merge the projects. You can see at a glance the new codes and then make some team decisions about what to do with them. So that's one way of tracking those kinds of things. Another way could be that you set up a new folder for new codes, and anybody who creates a new code would put them in their new codes folder. So that's another way that you could do that same kind of information. It's like a temporary housing of a new code until you've had a team meeting and decide where those codes belong, if they're going to be merged with other codes that people have created, and so on. The last thing that I wanted to talk about at this point in about the coding and so on is that often when people are setting out on a team project, especially if people are not new or are new, not used to working in a team environment, I would suggest highly that you do what is almost like a little sample run of how you're going to set things up. So you might have an established coding structure, potentially you don't, but I would suggest that you probably put in two or three sample interviews or 2 or 3 pieces of data. If you have a big survey, just make a small sample of that survey data and then make a project that gets distributed to each of your team members. Agree on who's going to do what, do the coding, and then merge your projects back together. And I keep talking about that. I'm going to show you that in a moment. But that whole process of actually doing a sample part of your data and taking it through to the coding, merging, putting it back together stage really helps you figure out, oh, what's working and what is certainly not working in our project. So that is a process I would highly recommend. Then once you've got the kinks worked out, you may or may not use the coding that was part of that original little pilot effort. If you do want to use it and it turned out pretty well, then you can use that project as the basis to go forward. So this merging project, how does it all work? Well, often when people are working in NVivo, everyone who's doing the coding typically has their own copy or their own licensed version of NVivo. And then sometimes a team decides that they're going to all code the same interviews, and 2 of us are going to code this group and 2 of us are going to code that group, and so on. Alternately, we might do that just at the beginning as we're establishing very rigorous kind of code book standards about what belongs where. And then after that, we're going to divide up the interviews and they're just going to be coded by one coder. Every process is a little bit different depending on the team, the method, the nature of their timelines, all of that kind of thing. So if you're in a situation where part of your data is going to be coded just by some of the people on the team, another thing that I suggest that can be quite helpful is creating what's called a static set. And in a static set, you can assign certain things in your project to the set. And it can be really helpful to have a set for the things that BJ is going to code or that Laura is going to code. And members of a set are, if in this case, let's say the interviews, I can actually come up to an interview and simply either add it to a set or create it as a set if we don't have a set there. So just something to pay attention to. If that's helpful to you, you can create sets for all kinds of groupings. It's kind of like creating a shortcut to certain items in your project. So that lives down here under the static sets. So this merging projects, let's say that we've got a number of files distributed. We're just at that pilot stage. We created a small project with 3 files. We distribute it to our 3 coders. What are we going to do to put our work back together again? Typically, what people do is have a naming system for each of their projects. So I might say it's project X and underscore Laura for Laura's version, probably with a date as well. And project X underscore Stacy for Stacy's coding work and the date for her project and so on. Before we do anything else, when we're going to merge projects, and this is a big tip, and I know this from having learned it the hard way, create a copy of your project. So if you're not sure how to do that, you can go to File, Copy Project, and create a copy. And always work with project copies when you're doing this, just in case something doesn't go the way you intended in the merge. You can always go back to your project data. And then you simply go to, you have one project open, that's your master project. You go to Import, and you import project, and it wants me to save my changes. And then you're going to browse to one of the other project copies that you're going to import and combine. So if this, my project, Laura's project, is going to be the master project, then I would go and find Stacy's project. It's not named that way, but let's pretend it is, and select that project to import. You'll see that it's loading the project, and then it's going to give me some options about what to do. And I really like thinking through these options, and sometimes just to help me be sure I'm doing the right thing, I'll even read it out loud to myself, so I'm making sure that I'm doing what I think I'm doing. So it's asking me if I want to include all of the content or perhaps just selected content. And I could then exclude certain items. So I might want to bring in my node structure or my code structure, for instance, but not all of the content of the code. Maybe we just want that coding structure to come in, but not all of the content. And similarly, then in this last bullet, this also is an important point. If it is the case that you are actually coding on the same documents with 2 different coders in 2 different projects, and you want to bring those together, then NVivo is saying, if I have duplicate items, do you want NVivo to merge those 2 together or to create something new? And you almost always want to merge those project items together so that my coding on an interview and Stacy's coding on the interview will now be merged, which allows us to have a look at what Stacy coded and what Laura coded, and how similar are we and how different are we. I'm not sure if you know, but if your text is a Word document, it can potentially be edited in NVivo. And one of the things that is really problematic when you're working in a team is if one person makes an edit on a Word document and the other person doesn't, and then you go to merge the project, NVivo will say these 2 are not duplicates, and you'll now have coding on what NVivo thinks are 2 different documents. So to avoid that, we also usually set up a team convention of saying nobody edits the documents in their individual projects. That can only happen in the merged project, which we'll periodically do. You can put a note about something that you might like to change on an annotation. So that's how you merge projects. And let's say that we've got some coding, we've merged our projects, and we want to have a look at who has coded what and where. So I'm going to open Barbara's interview here, and it opens in the detail view over here, and I'm going to come here and turn on my coding stripe for selected items, and I'm going to pop this window up. It doesn't. There we go. And for those selected items, I can actually come down to users and have NVivo show me the coding for these users. So what happens now is these coding stripes turn up on the right-hand side. You can see by their initials. That's why I talked about the initials, and you can start to see how important that becomes. I can see that Effie coded something here and Wanda coded something here. And if I hover over it, I can actually see who coded what and where. So if we've been working individually and now we want to see what did Stacy code, what did Laura code, have we got them coded consistently, and so on. For most projects that I work with, this kind of inter-rater reliability, if I'm using air quotes for that, is about enough. And that allows us to have a team discussion. Why did Effie code it here? Why didn't the other person code it there? And so on. So that's one way that you can quickly check to see who has coded what. But another way that you can do that, if you require something a little more rigorous, there is a feature in NVivo. One of the queries is called a coding comparison query. And this one is actually built into this sample project, so you can come back and have a look at it yourself. But I'm just going to close out of that. And you can have a look here at the coding comparison of Wanda to Effie. And it's on one interview. They wanted to check that out. And it will generate a kappa coefficient. And I'm not big on stats, but I think what you're aiming for is the higher the agreement is kind of indicating that we coded that consistently, what the level of disagreement is, and so on. So I would suggest that the coding comparison, if this is of interest to you or you need to submit it for journal purposes and so on, do go back to the help screen and double check what's actually being compared, because what NVivo typically does is compare character for character, how closely we did our coding the same way. And that may not be necessary for the kinds of work that you're doing. It may be simply enough to do those coding stripe comparisons that I showed you just before this. So then the last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is that piece called the Collaboration Cloud. And this is a new add-on to NVivo, which means it doesn't come with NVivo automatically, but it is something that you can purchase, and it's great for working if you have a small team, so small being 5 or less. And in the Collaboration Cloud, which is very compliant with most ethics agreements and institutions that you might come across, there are servers based locally in many countries. For instance, Canada has its own server for Collaboration Cloud, or the Collaboration Cloud, let me put it that way. Collaboration Cloud actually has a server in Canada, which is often a concern for Canadian researchers, let's say, about how and where their data is stored. But Collaboration Cloud can be purchased for folks who are working in a small team. Big advantage when you're doing that kind of cross-institutional work, it allows you to share your NVivo projects, mark whether they're available for download or if they're ready to be merged, and so on. Team roles come back into this. You appoint one person who's the administrator or the manager who kind of designates when things are going to be merged back together, and so on. The couple of other things about Collaboration Cloud, it only works with the newest versions of NVivo, so this one for Windows, or the new Mac version. It also works for that, but everyone on the team has to work within Windows or within Mac. So I think, Stacy, I'm going to end here, but Stacy is going to pull up Collaboration Cloud and just show us a little bit about what that looks like.
Okay, thanks, Laura. That was great. I always learn something when I see you present about NVivo. So as Laura mentioned, you can get to Collaboration Cloud right from here, but I'm going to go into our sample project, environmental change, and show you where you can get into it when you're in a project itself. So you can go up to modules, And there we go. And you can see I can click on Collaboration Cloud. This is also where you can get to NVivo transcription, which is a separate product to help you with transcribing. And so here I go into Collaboration Cloud and I first come to a workspace, and Laura mentioned that you can have, well, one thing is you can have multiple workspaces here. So if you have multiple NVivo projects with different teams, that's not a problem. You can have them all located here. I'm going to go into this project, and Laura mentioned that there's different types of roles in NVivo Collaboration Cloud. So here I'm a workspace manager, and so is my colleague Silvana. So that means that I basically will be able to assign roles to people and also bring people into the project that I want to work on the project, assign and unassign them. And I can also merge projects if I'm a workspace manager. And then Christy here is a collaborator, which means she can only download the project, work in it, code, upload it, and let me know as a workspace manager that it's ready to be merged, but she can't merge or assign people to the project. So you can see here, if I go to add people, I can select the people that are assigned to use Collaboration Cloud to the project, and I can select their roles right here. And then what I do is I'm able to upload the project. So I'd browse and go find, which I don't have a project right here, but I'd have a project that I would upload to the cloud so that I would be able to share it with my teammates. What's nice, I like, is that I can write a summary and notes to the collaborator. So one, and then maybe I want to say, well, make sure, please code all the interviews in a certain file or whatnot, so they'll see this note. It also will keep track of the different versions. So one thing it solves is Laura was talking about how you have to name them the right way, and I'll do all that to make sure if you don't use Collaboration Cloud and you're sharing the projects to merge, this Collaboration Cloud actually keeps track of the versions for you and the date here, so that can be helpful. So what happens here is I can then, I received version 2, I can download it to my computer, start working in it, and then I'd upload it again to cloud to share with my teammates. A little button for information about the project here, and then our help menu has a lot of good tips on how to use it and NVivo. So basically, it's very helpful to help you organize as a team, and it makes it easier for you to share. And you basically purchase a Collaboration Cloud product, which then can be used with up to 5 team members. And then if you have more than 5, you can add more to it if you need to. So that's Collaboration Cloud. And then I just want to go quickly to the PowerPoint, just to talk about resources that we have available to you in the handout, and then we'll take some questions at the end. So here's a link to Dissertation by Design services and all the great ways they can help you with your writing. This is just showing you an overview of how Citavi and NVivo can help you with your writing process, and then also what the different products are here. If you want a trial of Citavi, I put that in the chat, but you can also go right here to get a trial and then to learn more about it. Jenny has a lot of great short videos to help you learn how to use Citavi. And for NVivo, just showing you all the ways it can help you with your research process and the products that we have to help you with that process, and then to trial any of them, like Collaboration Cloud, you can do a trial. Just click here and you'll go to the trial page. Here's some resources, so free resources to learn NVivo, the hub, help menu, on-demand webinars, and our NVivo Academy. Of course, we have courses that you can take online to learn. The community, so this is a big part of my life, and one of the things that I do is help organize these types of events. So it'd be great if you want to join the community. We'll update you on other events we're having. But a big event is upcoming, our NVivo virtual conference in September, and our call for abstracts, they're due on June 30th. So please, we'd love to see your abstract. So submit that by June 30th. And then our early career research grant is coming out soon. That's $25,000 over a 2-year period. We're actually right now asking for reviewers for the grant, but we'll be announcing it very soon. So with that, I'm going to see if there's any questions. So first, Jessica, is there any questions that your team wanted to address from the ones I sent you?
Yeah, sure. There were a few questions that I think we could address. Oh, let me turn on my webcam so you can see me. There we go. So this is an interesting one. What are our tips on managing a research team in the field? I don't know if that's exactly like, even though if you're in academia in the field, or maybe you're not associated with academia, but would any of what we discussed today change if you were in the field?
I don't think it would change, but having that point person in the field is important. And for the different studies that I've done that were mixed methods, we had a quant point person and a qual point person, and that seemed to work out really well because they could field those questions and be in the know as far as the design and the data was concerned. And then the IRB issue as well, making sure that that person is making sure that the procedures are being followed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Another question that I thought was a good one is, do you have to have a professor lead a team in research? So I know that you don't have to. You need a PI, but I'd be curious to know, because I've only ever conducted research associated with a university. Have you guys conducted research outside of the university setting, and what does that look like? So, Lydia, are you conducting research right now?
We're actually engaged. Yes, we are conducting research and collecting data more from an evaluative validation standpoint. There are two arms of what we're doing. It's all around falls management and technology. We're partnering with universities, and so that is a very familiar space to me. But conducting research in industry, I still rely on my academic training. We aren't necessarily going through an IRB per se, but I also think the goals of the research are a little bit different too. Feels more like marketing research. But I think the research process in and of itself around team management, clear expectations, who's doing what, who's credentialed, who's qualified to do what are important. But you don't necessarily have to be affiliated with the university or have a professor on your team.
Right. Yeah, just needs to be someone who's seasoned.
Mm-hmm. Although I will say in industry, I think people do look to the academic partnership as a nice place for what people have in their mind as a validating neutral space with rigorous standards around research, how it's conducted, and what output looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Because if in the industry, if you're conducting research and you want to be able to use it in any incredibly useful sense, it's not just internal. Having that credibility and being associated with an organization where there are the rigorous standards of conducting research is important. This person asked, are applications such as Asana or Slack helpful for managing research teams? I've used Slack to communicate with the team, but I don't think I'm an authority on this, so I don't want to misspeak, but I know that I was told when I was using Slack, we were strictly prohibited from discussing data or any identifiable information on that type of channel. Those were the big ones that stood out to me. A few people asked for examples of some of the tables that we were talking about, which I don't have on hand to share. But there are a lot of really great articles online when you look at managing research teams. Like Veronica sent me that article this morning with the authorship grid. So there are some amazing resources out there. So I encourage you to kind of do a little bit of research, see what you can find online.
Jessica, on the first question that you asked, I think I would add for the team to be sensitive to the participants and the needs, and if anything is changing, then need to be making changes as the research design allows. I think that would be in the field something that I've experienced several times where we're like, oh gosh, we've used the wrong word in the survey, or you know, it's not culturally connected with what's happening here. We need to make a change, and then making that change right away. That's definitely something that I would add to that.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in because we actually did a series of culturally responsive research webinar series this last spring. We had about 6 of them that I thought were really good. The researchers, I mean, did an excellent job. I don't know, Veronica, you might have been at one of them. And those are on our website in the on-demand section. So I suggest, you know, you'll get a lot of good insight from watching those.
Yeah, don't design your study in a bubble. Think about who your participants are.
Well, I also want to thank everyone, all our presenters today. Another great session,